Hi, I'm Jack Baruzzini, and you're listening to The Secrets of Stargate, where we talk about the hidden meanings and deeper layers found in the Stargate movies, TV series, and more. And joining me today are Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father.
Howdy, Jack.
And Lisa Jones. Hi, Lisa.
Hey, Jack.
And Victor Lambs. Hey, Victor.
Hi, Jack.
And I'm also very excited to introduce Joseph Mallozzi joining us today. Thank you very much for coming on the show. We've really been looking forward to this.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, he's a writer and producer on SG1, Atlantis, and Universe, and his more recent work includes the Sci-Fi Channel series Dark Matter and Utopia Falls, which is currently airing on Hulu. Did you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself and just give our audience an introduction?
Well, that was pretty much it. I mean,
Yeah.
I was a writer producer on Stargate for 12 years, 17 seasons, and then from there I went on to do my own show, Dark Matter, for Netflix and Sci-Fi for 3 seasons. And then I did a Friends show called Utopia Falls, as you mentioned, and that was recently on YouTube, on Hulu. And I am presently writing the development merry-go-round. So
Nice.
who knows what the
nice.
future holds?
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. So this is something I've been wanting to ask someone who's been involved with like the creative world. I don't know if you've been following like all the developments with AI art and Chat GPT and all these AI based tools that people have now.
I have.
What are your thoughts on how that will affect creativity? Because I know I've seen a lot of people saying that would be good for like developing concept art and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the art and it's amazing. I think it will affect different areas in different ways. I mean, I liken it to, I remember when I was on Stargate, our visual effects supervisor, James Titchener, always used to come by and say, streaming is the future. One of these days you should invest in streaming. And I thought, I've been hearing about streaming for years and how it was going to take over. But in my mind, I was like, if it was going to happen, it would have happened already. And who wants to watch TV on their laptop? And then 3 years later, it happened. So I feel as though it's the same thing now. I mean, in my mind, I think, yes, art is one thing. Illustrations. Writing is another. Specifically, a sense of humor is something that I think would be very difficult to capture for an AI. And again, now I say it now, and I'm kind of scoffing, but who knows, 2 years down the line, we may be having a completely different conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I saw that there was a Twitch stream that was AI generated Seinfeld that was on for a while, and I watched some of that, and it was bizarre is really the best way to put it.
Right. Yeah. I did see a bit of that. And I mean, what I said holds with regard to the humor.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Awesome. Father Cory, I know you had a question.
Yeah, so when Stargate first came out, both the movie and the first couple seasons of SG1, I was actually in the Air Force at the time, and I kind of got a kick out of it. I'd see them on screen; they're wearing the same uniforms I am and everything. It's kind of like, okay. So, and of course, find out later that the Air Force had really worked closely with you and some of the other producers. What was that like? Were there things that you wanted to do that the Air Force said we can't go there, or vice versa? Things that the Air Force wanted to do that you kind of said we really don't want to go there?
No, we were always very respectful of the Air Force, and the Air Force really loved the show, so much so that we had 2 generals do guest appearances on our shows, General Ryan and General Jumper. And on SG1, the later shows, Atlantis and Universe, sort of stepped away from sort of the military aspect. But with regard to SG1, the Air Force vetted all the scripts and essentially weighed in on all the episodes. But there was never a time. It was always small things like saluting or not saluting indoors, or wearing hats or not wearing hats. There were small things. There was never any objections to the type of stories we would tell. And to be honest, we were always very respectful of the military. We always appreciated the support we received. And, I think back to a lot of the fan mail we would get, and I was amazed by some of the fan mail we would receive from the troops who were overseas and would say, we love watching the show. Thank you. And actually we even got like a video message from the space station once. which
Cool.
which
Oh,
was
that'd be
amazing.
really cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's cool to see. I know a lot of like I'm an army brat, and I know a lot of people like my dad's friends. They were always really into like science fiction and stuff like that. I think it definitely attracts that kind of audience.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go, Lisa?
Sure. So I was I watched Stargate from the very beginning with my husband. It was our show as we got married and had our kids. And I watch it now and my kids are grown. And I wonder, it's had such an enduring fan base. I've been surprised to see on Twitter and everywhere else that everyone still is connected to the show. And you're seeing all these new fans pop up, a new generation of Stargate fans. So what do you think makes it that we all still love it so much? What makes the show so unique?
I think it's a bunch of things. One aspect of the show that makes it very different from a lot of the sci-fi shows out there is the fact that it was set in the here and now. And so it's a very contemporary setting, and the characters for instance, in SG1, Sam, Jack, and Daniel, Teal less so, were characters that audiences could connect with. And that's another thing I think a lot of sci-fi in general has just kind of stepped away from. Not all sci-fi, but a lot have stepped away from, I guess, kind of human stories or kind of lighter stories. One thing I always say in podcasts is I'm a firm believer in humor being almost a shorthand that allows audiences to connect with characters. And you look at sort of who are the fan favorites is characters like McKay and Eli in Universe, and obviously Jack in SG1, and he had that sense of humor. And even though it had its comic moments, which I think allowed audiences to really connect with the characters, that didn't prevent us from going dark in many stories. And I think I would argue that those flashes of humor made those darker moments all the more dark or all the more present when we did those types of stories. So, I think it really comes down to characters, and I think we were always fairly respectful to our audience. I've tried to maintain a fairly active online presence since Stargate. I'm from the very beginning. Interacted with the fandom, and I'll be honest with you, fandom can be a double-edged sword in that they're very passionate. So if they like what you're doing, they will let you know, and if they don't like what you're doing, they will definitely let you know as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the things I've been really enjoying about Stargate, because this is actually my first watch through of the show. I'm the only one on the panel who hasn't watched it previously. Like, I grew up on Star Trek and Star Wars, and I've always been a fan of sci-fi, but I hadn't gotten around to Stargate. And it's so refreshing to see, like, I can watch it and it's fun. Like, it addresses serious topics, and like it has dark moments, like you said, but it doesn't leave me feeling depressed like I feel like a lot of more modern television shows have done lately.
Yeah, speaking of that, my wife and I, we've watched Stargate with all of our kids, and currently our 10-year-old is the one who's very into it. He could tell you the ins and outs of how the gate network works, how the dialing computers work. He's memorized the gate addresses. He's very into it. He wants to be a gate technician when he grows up. But just thinking back to your own childhood, were there movies or TV shows that you watched that really inspired you to become a writer, where you said, that's what I want to do?
I was an avid reader growing up. I think back and I was reading the complete works of William Shakespeare in elementary school. And I remember I had these leather-bound collected works, and I had like a duotang where I would dutifully take notes on each act. And my mother was very proud. And then I graduated from Shakespeare to comic books, which I think alarmed her. So I think sort of direct me away from comic books. She started to gift me science fiction novels. So I discovered Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, Harlan Ellison, Bradbury. And that's how I got interested in writing. And I would write short stories. And in my mind, I thought I would always be a writer. And again, my mother sort of stepped in and said, well, no one makes a living as a writer. You become a journalist or a lawyer, and maybe you write on the side. And that didn't really appeal to me. So I guess I was very lucky in many respects, and being able to make a career out of something I loved, and sci-fi was something I loved as well. And again, I never imagined I'd make a career out of it. Yet here I am. So far, so good.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I saw that you also started in a lot of children's television show, and there was Richard Scarry was on there, and I loved that show as a kid.
That was my first. That was my first credit, my first writing credit. I was trying to break into the industry, and I sent out a bunch of resumes, and I think 10 companies wrote back, and one of them, which was an animation company, wrote back and said, "Well, we're not looking for script readers, but if you'd like to pitch, this is how it works. We'll send you a series Bible of our show, and you pitch us some ideas. And if we like one of your ideas, we'll buy the idea and we'll hire you to write the script." And so my first writing credit was on an episode of Busy World of Richard Scarry, an episode called Patrick Pig Learns to Talk. That is just classic. I think Joseph Mallozzi, there's a setup. It's very character centered, but then there's a twist at the end. And you can check it out. You'll love it. And that was my first sale. And then I worked my way up from animation to live action teen sitcom. I did a series called Student Bodies for Fox. And then I graduated to 1 hour action adventure and fairly soon landed on Stargate SG1. To be honest with you, we didn't realize it would be, it would go for so long. We assumed we would join for season 5. We would we joined in season 4. We would do a 5th season, and then we'd be looking for work. And, as it turns out, we were there for the long haul.
Nice. That's awesome.
Indeed.
So if you'd had an unlimited budget on the show, are there any ideas that you wish you could have done that were constrained by budget or just by the technology at the time?
I mean, to be honest, no. In terms of stories, we pretty much got to tell whatever stories we wanted to tell. And I'll be honest, I mean, was it like over 300, almost 350 episodes of television? As time goes on, if you have an idea, you make it work.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's a machine. And I remember for a couple of years, we were producing 40 episodes of television a season, which is unheard of now. Like nowadays, where it's like an 8 to 10 episode first seasons. So there weren't really any stories we didn't get to tell. I mean, there were always budgetary constraints in terms of the spectacle. Obviously everyone loves visual effects, and we love the visual effects laden stories, but we always had to be very judicious and find ways to tell the smaller stories and, the messages in a bottle or the dreaded clip shows, that would help us pay for the later episodes. But we found that, a lot of the times those smaller episodes were the ones that fans ended up really responding to. And Ripple Effect is one, and Window of Opportunity is another. Even though, there was some off-world adventuring. It was a pretty self-contained episode, but we leaned into the characters, we leaned into the humor. And surprisingly, that episode has, really stood the test of time. Simply insofar as the fandom is concerned, it always makes it the top of the fan favorite lists, which is amazing. It heartens me.
Yeah, no, it's
definitely one of our favorites on the podcast here.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys like time loop episodes, I advise you to check out Dark Matter, Season 3, Episode 4. So I knew I wanted to write a time loop episode for Dark Matter. And, I struggled with it. And I ended up watching, I think, 36 separate time loop episodes of 36 different TV shows and various movies, Run the Low Run and Groundhog Day. And I distilled the formula. And then, one of the things I always did I love doing on Dark Matter is present kind of the sci-fi trope and then subvert audience expectations. So episode 304, All the Time in the World. Check it out. So it's a perfect bookend to my career. You know, kind of started with Window of Opportunity, and maybe almost ending with All the Time in the World.
You mentioned Run Lola Run, and then you got to cast Franca Potente on Dark Matter, which was a treat to see her.
Yeah. She was great, and that was a lot of fun. That was actually in response to the German broadcasters, because the just international sci-fi fans have always been so amazing, and it always it struck me as almost bizarre how these Stargate producers would go to LA to take meetings, and we'd say, "Oh, we worked on Stargate," and executives there would be like, "Oh, did that air in the U.S.?" Whereas if Christopher Judge is walking down the streets of Paris, to this day, people will like run up to him, Monsieur Tilk, Monsieur Tilk. And it's just kind of a world of difference. So the international buyers or international broadcasters were very supportive of Dark Matter. And it's kind of a thank you. You ask, well, who would you like to see guest star on the show? And
nice.
It's awesome.
So
that is awesome. So I, as a priest, morality is a big issue in my life. It's something I'm concerned or interested in. And, that one thing I liked about the Stargate series is not afraid to talk about moral issues. That was something you would bring up. And as you mentioned, there are times where you had some very dark issues to deal with, but Stargate took a very different approach to like the morality of being involved in other cultures than say like Star Trek does.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek, you got the Prime Directive, you got things like that. And there's kind of the running joke online about, the Prime Directive, we can't give them weapons. Stargate, here's a P90,
the anti-Prime Directive, yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. Were there issues that you wanted to kind of look at, maybe even consequences to that morality that the Stargate universe had?
I'm just trying to remember if we did explore, I mean, in my mind, I mean, we did I was involved maybe closer to 300 episodes. So in many ways, they're all a blur. I remember the specific episodes, but in terms of themes, I'm trying to think. I feel as though it would have been something that we we would have looked to address in an episode or two.
Yeah, because I couldn't remember any episodes. There are obviously, like I said, there are episodes where you can think of where they're showing the Jaffa, all the different, Earth weapons and things like that, and that was obviously very much, this is better than what you have, but I can't remember
we would get a lot of flack for that online. As much as many fans loved SG1, a lot of, I wouldn't say fans, a lot of people who took exception with the show, the fact that they were military, they were going out, they were in their view colonizing other worlds. So we would get a lot of that on the message boards as well. And again, it was something we were always mindful of. And ultimately, I think once SG1 and Atlantis was very much followed in SG1's footsteps tonally and just in terms of, the type of stories we told. I think Brad and Robert wanted to kind of change up the pace, and which is why they created Stargate Universe, which is darker, more serialized. And I think if it had aired today, it would have done very well. But I think at the time, especially coming on the heels of the Stargate Atlantis cancellation, and the fans were not in a good mood, and they were presented with a show called Stargate that was not as funny, and so they took exception, and it was unfortunate. We did 2 seasons, which is fine, but it would have been nice to have gone a little longer.
Do you think we can get back to funny like sci-fi, or something that where the characters do the right things and you can watch with your kids? And
I'm trying. I for one am trying. So I've got a couple of pitches out there. But I mean, it's funny. I don't watch a lot of sci-fi television, just simply because when I'm in development. If I'm not writing or working on something, I feel guilty. And so the only break I take is reading, because in my mind, I think reading is almost a type of research. I could be looking, this could be, the next thing I read could be a book I'd be looking to adapt.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, sitting down and investing time in a television show, it's something I don't know. I can't reconcile. When I'm in development, when I'm in production, at that point, I know what needs to be done. At the end of the day, the work, whatever the script that needs to be written, the episode that needs to be produced, or edited. Once that's done, then I know I have free time. And at that point, that's when I catch up on all my TV watching. But I don't know. There's so many Star Trek shows out there. I would imagine that at least one of them has a sense of humor. No, I don't know. I'm honest. I don't know.
They've been trending that way, definitely.
Yeah.
And there's an animated one, Lower Decks, it's very much almost satire on Star Trek, and it's great. It's wonderful.
There you go.
All right, I'll to stop y'all from talking about Star Trek, I'll jump in.
Oh, no. This is a running concern.
Joke with them. So back in the day, and even now, and the guys give me a little grief for it, I've always been a Sam Jack shipper. I was one of those people. And I just wondered, I've seen your comments on Beneath the Surface and some of the others. How did y'all walk that fine line of their relationship? And my impression, I always thought y'all did a great job. I liked it, that it wasn't too much. It wasn't too, it's like just a little bit of tease to the fans, a little bit of, a nod, and then move on. And did you get a lot of grief for it?
I mean, we did. I think I was fairly vocal. Like I said, I've always been fairly active online, and I was very vocal about the fact that I was actually a Sam Jack shipper, and if I could ship them, I would have. But and then I got flack from the anti-shippers. But it was kind of an easy decision for us because, from a military standpoint, that wouldn't have flown. And I think. We talked about the fact that the Air Force vetted all the scripts, and if something would have happened, that would have been very inappropriate, and they would have pushed back. And so it's just something it wasn't really possible for us to pursue. But there was always the opportunity to hint, and like for instance, there's that moment in Window of Opportunity where Jack essentially resigns and then dips her. So that. There was a possibility of something more, and I think the only way it would have ultimately worked would be to have had Jack retire, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school when I say that in Brad's pilot for the new series, he actually wrote a pilot for a new series that he pitched to MGM and they liked, but they sent off to Amazon, and Amazon has gone dark, and I think they're talking to some other people. But it's pretty clear that Jack is retired, and he and Sam are an item.
Yeah.
So sadly, it's in a pilot that doesn't look like it's going to get produced.
No, but it existed.
But yes.
Poor Daniel.
Yeah.
Victor is a Daniel Sam shipper.
He's right there. He's not in the military.
Daniel
That's like sibling.
It's funny because we would always get the Sam Jack shippers and then the anti-shippers who were actually Jack Daniel shippers.
Yes.
The Daniel Sam shippers, they were a rarity. To be honest with you. Yeah.
There you go.
All the signs are there. You just have to connect the dots.
He has a cork board with strings and everything in his room.
He touched her arm.
Speaking of Jack and Daniel, I've kind of felt like they are representative of the two kind of almost opposing views of the Stargate program in the show. Like Daniel is the scientist coming in, and he's very much focused on the science and the knowledge of that. And then Jack's main focus is kind of what the primary stated mission is, which is finding technology to help Earth. And you see them clash a lot about that.
Yeah.
And so I really like that. Was that something that arose organically, or was that something that was planned?
Oh, no, that was something that pre-existed our involvement in the show. And so one of our first episodes was an episode called Scorched Earth, where they really have it out and with regard to how they deal with this situations where the ship is terraforming a planet that is essentially already occupied. And of course, Jack wants to blast the ship out of the sky. Daniel wants to use diplomacy. And, there's a point in the episode where Daniel is on the ship and Jack gives the order to blow it up. But the alien on board, I think his name is Lotan, overrides.
Yeah.
It's essentially, I guess, a happy ending. Well, it's got a really bittersweet ending in that sort of Lotan decides to shut down the terraforming. He's convinced to shut down, and the alien race he's caretaking essentially perishes. So it was, I was that? No, hang on.
It was rewritten.
Sorry, you was rewritten? Yes, no,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the original version actually was kind of dark, where he actually shuts it down, and no, actually at the end, now that I think of it, that was our first episode, and I really hated the ending. That was, when you first, in that first season, as you're trying to capture the voices, the showrunners will always rewrite you to a certain extent. And so they rewrote the ending to the episode. And I think about that. Now you're bringing back, I'm flashing back to like really bad memories of, I did not like the ending. I forget how it ended. I think basically they ended up moving the people off the planet. And I was like, that is such an easy, why didn't anybody think of that from the very beginning?
Yeah. And then Daniel found a planet for them in the database that they could live on, and they zipped off to there.
Yeah. Oh my God. If I would have pitched that, I would never have landed on the show.
Yeah. Speaking of pitches, so there's a new generation. I think of my kids. They have stories to tell that they want to tell to a larger audience. What sort of advice would you give to them? Is it just read a lot, practice your writing in every way you can, send out pitches, grab a 8mm camera and make your movie?
Well, I mean, there's so many ways to go about it, but I would say if you're looking to write, then write. Read a lot, write even more. Try to get in touch with people who work in the industry. I think Twitter is, as maddening as it can be, it's a great opportunity to connect with professionals and interact with them online. I got my foot in the door through animation, and I find, historically, it's always been easier to break into animation just because they do so much more of it, and they're always looking for new writers. And it allows you to get your foot into the door in the industry. It allows you to hone your craft. It allows you to get paid while you do it, and then hopefully make the transition from animation to live action, which is what we did. When I say we, I refer to my former writing partner and I, Paul Mully. From animation to live action teen sitcom to 1 hour action adventure. I mean, that's kind of a longer road, but I think back to something a friend of mine once said, that breaking into the business is like breaking out of prison. Everyone goes about it differently, because as soon as you found a way out, the authorities kind of seal up that escape tunnel, and so you got to find another way. But I think animation is a great way in. And then just in general, always have 2 great scripts. One original pilot that demonstrates your ability to create worlds and create characters, and then another spec script that specs an existing show that shows that you're able to capture the tone and the voices of a show that's already out there.
Excellent advice.
Nice. Yeah. I think you were saying this before the show, Victor, but didn't Dark Matter start as a graphic novel?
I got my start in animation, writing animation. Then eventually I became a director of development at an animation studio, and I would come across these great original ideas. And whenever I pitch them to the executives, they'd be like, not really interested. But if I pitch them like the most banal book, they'd be like, that's great. And of course, that's great because it's an IP, it's an intellectual property, and it's, in their mind, a proven property. So I was very cognizant of that after I wrote the Dark Matter pilot. And I thought, okay, we could go out and we could try to pitch it, or I could reach out to a comic book company and establish it as an IP. And that's what I did. I reached out to Dark Horse Comics, and we ended up publishing what would be the first 2 episodes of Dark Matter as a 4-issue miniseries. And then Jay Firestone of Prodigy Pictures went out and he pitched the series with the comic book. And as I've often said, executives, when you pitch them, will imagine the worst possible execution of your vision. But having the comic book there as a visual aid, I think, helped a lot. And so he ended up selling the show, obviously with the pitch and the comic book. And we went into development. And they're like, well, okay, great. We want you to write the first, the pilot. And we're like, okay. And we sat on our hands for 2 weeks and then basically pulled the pilot out. And it was like, here you go. And they're like, great. This is just like the comic book. And, and went from there.
Nice. That's awesome.
I was going to ask actually something about Stargate Universe, but the series Stargate Universe and kind of the change in tone, because it is a much darker. And I'd heard it kind of described at the time, and you probably had too. Is basically Battlestar Galactica in the the Stargate Universe. But was that also kind of a conscious choice to look at, again, going back to kind of the moral issues that they're dealing with? They're in a completely different circumstance, a completely different situation. They're, cut off from Earth and everything. Was there kind of that conscious choice as well?
Very much so. And, this would be a better question for Brad and Robert, who really created the series. But they wanted to do something different. And at the time, I don't even think they wanted to necessarily do a Stargate show. But everybody wanted a new Stargate show. So the show that they had envisioned became a Stargate series. And I think they kind of pitched it and the networks were excited and they were like, well, what do you call it? And I think they came up with the name on the spot. They were like, Stargate Universe. And they're like, that's great. And so Stargate Universe was born. But it was very dark. It, looking back, I think it maybe suffered a bit from a lack of pacing, especially in the first half of the first season, as you're, kind of a slow burn narrative as you're establishing the world and the characters and the shipboard dynamics was very, claustrophobic and dark, and especially the lighting. I would hear from fans all the time, we can't see anything. The corners are too dark. And it's funny because I remember, we would watch every episode, obviously we would watch the mixes and we would watch the show look fantastic on our TVs in editing or in the writer's room. But I remember watching it on at home and I was like, wow, this is really dark. They were right.
Well, I think we all have our favorite guest stars, and y'all did such a good job of bringing in a lot of great talent. So do you have a favorite across any of the shows who to work with or who to write for? Yeah,
both is the same person. That would be Robert Picardo. So when, I was also a big Star Trek fan growing up. I watched the 60s early version. I could never get into Star Trek Next Gen. It's one of those Star Treks I skipped over just because I found the uniform so ill-fitting and everyone was so stiff. I was like, I don't know. And then I ended up, I watched Deep Space Nine on and off, and I did like it. I just didn't have time. And then I watched Voyager at a time where my ex and I were living on opposite sides of the country, and I thought that was kind of very sort of thematically on point. And we would both watch Voyager and then discuss afterwards. And I loved Bob's portrayal of the Doctor, and I had always wanted to get him on the show. We did get him on the show as Woolsey on SG1, and he was just so good, and he was just such a good guy. And I think back to kind of the process of writing the scripts, and we would write the scripts, and then, once they went down to set, sometimes we would never know what would, how they would turn out, because sometimes the actors would say something completely different, and sometimes it was a pleasant surprise, and other times it was, a bit of a head scratcher. And that was Richard Dean Anderson was notorious for doing that. But Bob Picardo and Beau Bridges, two guys who had worked so much in the industry, they would always come up to the office and be like, "Do you mind if we change this word?" And it would be just the most innocuous changes. And we would be like, "Yeah, of course." And be always appreciative of the fact that they did that. And, that's one takeaway. I always have in back of my mind about working with Bob. But, over time, I just love Bob. I love his character. So we kind of redeemed him. And one of the ways we redeem him is, I mentioned the fact that humor allows audiences to connect with characters and to humanize them, and that's what we did with Woolsey. And he was introduced as kind of this annoying pencil pusher, and then we got to know him and realize that there was kind of a sense of nobility about him. And I wrote him into a couple of SG1 scripts, like the Scourge and Atlantis, and then after. When Amanda ended up getting Sanctuary, decided to leave for Sanctuary, I knew who I had to call, and I called up Bob. And at that point, we were actually very good friends, and to this day, we remain very, very good friends. And I said, I want you to come in and do the show. And he was like, I don't know. I'm going to have to ask. He was married at the time. He's like, I'm going to have to ask my wife. And I was like, sure. And then he called me back. He's like, okay. And I was like, great. So we're going to get in touch with your agent. And back then, previously, whenever we would have to do deals, we would always have to go through MGM Business Affairs, and it would take months and months and months. And so I just called our casting agent and to get in touch with his agent, find out what his quote is, and we'll pay the quote. And we want to get him on the show. And we closed the deal that afternoon. It was the fastest deal we ever closed. And then Bob was on Stargate Atlantis, and his character of Woolsey was the most fun to write for. And you could sort of chart his redemption from the early SG1 to Atlantis, his first appearances at Atlantis, to that fifth season where, we take him from that pencil pusher to the commander of the Atlantis expedition, and just kind of those funny kind of warm moments. Like, I remember writing that one scene where I could never figure out how those doors opens and close in that conference room. And so I kind of made a gag of it where basically everybody gets up and leaves. And he's the last one there. And he gets up to go, and then the doors close on him. And he's like trying to figure out how to open them. And then, his comedic timing was always great. So I wrote that episode, whose, it's a title I can never remember. But essentially, there were three stories going on. There was McKay dealing with this alien device, piece of technology that he'd recovered, and dealing with Zelenka. There was Shepard caught on the mainland with Kolya, who cuts off his hand. And then there's Woolsey, who is smitten with this new, I think she's Aussie scientist. And kind of playing this kind of game, and then ultimately you realize that the device McKay is testing is causing them all to hallucinate, and so Shepard's hand isn't really cut off. He's just hallucinating Kolya, and McKay's hallucinating Zelensky, and not Zelensky, Zelenka. Yeah. And we find out that the woman that Woolsey is smitten with is actually an alien who is looking for a way home. And it was just kind of a fun episode in that, those are the type of stories I love to tell, where there are three seemingly disconnected stories that end up dovetailing at the end in satisfactory fashion. And also it was just great to see Bob Flex's his comedic acting chops.
Yeah, my favorite Woolsey moment early on, and this is kind of where it really humanizes him, is after they've had a rough day and he's in his, Atlantis uniform and he says, I'm going to go slip into something more comfortable. And it cuts to his quarters and he's wearing a suit and he has a glass of wine, he's listening to Mozart or something.
I think that was Bob's idea. He actually pitched that to me and I was like, I love it. And then we wrote it into the script.
Yeah, it was a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
I mean, that just gets me every time.
And as a fan, he's so great at developing these characters as an actor. 'Cause
Mhm.
I know a lot of development of the character comes from the writers and the producers and so on, but also the actor, I'm sure, has a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
And both the Doctor and Woolsey are both characters that they go from really being kind of secondary characters to being primary important characters of the series.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to what happened on Star Trek, but on Stargate, it was very much that. He was a smaller character who just impressed us, and we just kind of loved working with the guy. And just Bob is a genuinely great guy. So it was one thing I said very early on in my career was that if someone I work with was genuinely great, I would let people know as much as possible. And then if someone I work with wasn't great, I would never mention them. So,
Do we want to ask that question?
No.
Best not to.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, it's were there any characters, speaking of kind of on that same thread, where when they were sort of envisioned, they ended up going in a very, very different direction from what y'all were planning when you were writing them, just by virtue of how the actors were? Like, would Woolsey be one of those, or were there ones that kind of did the opposite, where you envision them being as more like good and they ended up being more of a negative character?
No, Woolsey was one, obviously, but the character of Rodney McKay was another one. I mean, he was a character who was simply a pain in the ass in SG1. And then we were gearing up to produce Atlantis, and there was a character that was written, Dr. Benjamin something. I forget. And we couldn't cast him. And we were getting closer and closer to principal photography, and they were scrambling. They were like, well, we need this character. We can't cast him. What are we going to do? And then Rob Cooper suggested, why don't we bring McKay to Atlantis? And we were like, I mean, he's just so unlikable. We really want him. And at that point, I didn't even, I don't know if we even mentioned it. I think we did mention his first name, and we're like, what is his first name? And Rob was like, Rodney. I think he named it after a guy he went to high school with. I'm like, that's a terrible name. Can we change the name? And they're like, no, it's too late. And so we ended up bringing Rodney McKay onto Atlantis, and it was a very fortuitous, very smart decision in that he's a character who he didn't stop being really a jerk, but we just understood him a little more. And again, through his sense of humor, we got to like him a lot. And in fact, I mean, he was, I think, by far the fan favorite on that show.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine Atlantis without Rodney McKay. Definitely.
And really tough to have the audience come to like a character without sanding off the edges, the rough spots,
Right.
Yeah. It was
Yeah, definitely. You get more of a rounded view of people as time goes on, and that's true in television too.
Yeah, and those are honestly the type of characters I love to write for, and I love to watch. The ones who aren't so black or white, or are the type of characters who you may hate in the beginning and end up loving, or vice versa, characters you love and then end up hating. Like, I think back to two shows that I love, The Shield and Breaking Bad, and they did the opposite. In The Shield, you're introduced to this, bad cop called Vic Mackey, who ends up shooting another cop in the pilot, and you hate this character, and then over time, despite yourself, you begin to like him. Whereas with Walter White in Breaking Bad, he's this poor high school chemistry teacher who finds out he's got cancer and he's dying. You feel such sympathy for the character. But then by the end of the series run, he's like,
a monster.
An animal, a monster. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you joining us tonight. Do you want to let the audience know where they can find you online? I know it's pretty easy. You're always very involved with the fandom, and we've always really appreciated that.
You can find me on Twitter at Baron Destructo. Should be easy to remember. I do frequent the Reddit, the Stargate subreddit, and I also have Instagram, which I've just been using recently. I hated the fact that you couldn't post from your laptop, but I think they've sorted that out. So on Twitter, on Reddit, and on Instagram, I've been posting Stargate concept art for the past, I think, 3 or 4 months. So you can get all caught up on that. I also have a blog, www.josephmallozzi.com, where I discuss everything from my ancient 17-year-old pug to Stargate to I think I'm doing a horror movie marathon. I'm about 206 movies in to K-pop. So I cover it all. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome.
I love seeing your concept art that you post, seeing what the artists were thinking and what you probably were thinking as a writer as well, working with them, and what ended up with.
I'm going to drop actually one interesting piece of concept art, or 2 pieces of concept art in upcoming day or 2, I think, for the episode Missing in Atlantis, where Jules' character and Rachel's character end up being, Taylor and Dr. Keller end up being lost in the woods, and they have to eat something, and they end up spearing this. Taylor ends up spearing this creature that it looks like a squid or a jellyfish. She ends up eating, and in the script, I described it as a space gopher. And basically, what I'm going to do is I want to show you the concept for the space gopher and what we ended up with in the end, and drastically different. So you can look forward to that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Before we go, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Stargate, including Jared C., Joseph W., Matthew B., Joshua N., and Paula W. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Stargate and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give, and be sure to follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or on the SQPN YouTube channel. To find previous episodes of Secrets of Stargate and to send feedback, please visit sqpn.com/Stargate, and you can email us at stargate@sqpn.com or follow StarQuest on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia or on Twitter at SQPN. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the next episode of SG1. Until then, Joseph Mallozzi, thank you very much for joining us and sharing the Secrets of Stargate.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
And Father Cory, thank you too.
Well, thank you, Jack.
And Lisa Jones, thank you as well.
Thanks, Jack.
And Victor Lambs, thank you too.
Thanks, Jack.
And once again, I'm Jack Baruzzini. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Stargate on StarQuest.
Anyway, I'm sorry, but that just happens to be how I feel about it. What do you think?